Clone by Richard Cowper, published in 1972. I've got this Pan science fiction edition with this interesting cover art, which actually is a wraparound. I've actually heard some people pronounce Richard Cowper as Richard Cooper, but to be honest with you, I don't really care because this is a candidate for the worst book that I have read this year. It follows a clone named Alvin who is working at this hydrology plant in rural England in a world which has become extremely overpopulated. And so these kind of enormous water plants are used to generate power and provide clean drinking water for these enormous populations. The description of Alvin on the blurb is, Alvin isn't very clever and his ears stick out. Can't relate to that one. Alvin is this very low intelligence character. He is kind of odd looking, and he's actually living and working at the plant with this population of intelligent apes, specifically chimps. So they are talking chimps that are used as a workforce, and they've all been given prosthetic thumbs for some reason, which I couldn't really figure out the reasoning behind because I'm pretty sure that chimps do have opposable thumbs anyway, so I'm not really sure why this was the case in this book. But that's the least of its issues. Alvin is friends with a specific chimp called Norbert, who accompanies and looks out for Alvin throughout the story. Alvin can't remember his life before being at this plant, as his memories have been erased, and one day he sees a vision of a woman that he describes as an angel. And when he reports this to the scientists that are running the plant and monitoring Alvin, they are worried that he's recalling his memories from before his time at the plant. So they send him off to London, this futuristic, overpopulated London, along with Norbert, the talking chimp, to go and get checked out. So why do I say that this is potentially the worst book that I've read this year? Well, almost instantly you are hit with some extremely poor writing, where it feels like Cowper has sat with a thesaurus next to him, consistently injecting complicated words to make very simple descriptions and sentences into more complex constructions in an effort to make himself seem more intelligent to the reader. And the book is absolutely riddled with this, which makes a lot of it borderline unreadable. And I was actually laughing out loud at some points, and that comedy value is completely unintentional for those sections. There is some attempts at comedy in here, which again aren't particularly great. I did mark a few of these passages to read out, which is not something I would ordinarily do, but I think it will give you a flavour of the kind of writing here and just how persistent it is throughout the book. A recent attempt to program her paramour with a retrospective approximation of Dimitri's physical coordinates had been grievously frustrated by the temperature moderator going on the blink at the critical moment and drastically reducing the degree of tumescence. That's out of context, but even in context, it is completely overwritten with some really baffling language choices. There's another one I marked here later on in the book. The clone's face resembled a palimpsest in which mortification was scribbled over incredulity. Just a completely overly complicated way to describe someone's facial expression. The book is filled with this and it frustrated me, although it did make me laugh at a number of points. So I found the writing to be bad, but also some of the content to be horrendous as well. There is a point in here, and this is a minor spoiler, but to be honest with you, I don't think you should particularly care, where in this world, the apes, these chimps, have formed this anarchist political party where they're revolting against humanity in an effort to secure more freedom for themselves, and a female main character is kidnapped by these apes, and they commit horrendous, horrific acts to her, which, when Alvin encounters her after this has happened, she shrugs it off, almost laughs about it, and then actually offers to engage in some of those activities with Alvin to show him what all the fuss is about, which I just found to be absolutely disgusting. And it's not necessarily about the events that take place. It's more about how the character reacts to them. And the female characters in this book are all exactly like that, and I found it to be incredibly frustrating, and it completely took me out of the story a number of times. So this book doesn't have many reviews or ratings on Goodreads, and occasionally you will stumble across a book that is a bit more obscure that deserves probably to be read by a wider audience, but this one is obscure for a reason. Richard Cowper is obscure for a reason, because I don't think he's a good writer. The actual prose in here sucks, the characters suck, and all of it is there to serve this sort of meandering plot anyway, where it does just feel like I've completely wasted my time with this one. Next up, we've got Mirror Image by Michael G. Coney, published in 1972. I'm not going to show you the back of this one because it spoils the entire plot. Luckily, I read that ages ago and I'd completely forgotten it, and I didn't read it again when I came to read it this time because of an experience that I had with The Inheritors, which I think I reviewed in my last video. Annoyingly, I did this damage to the cover myself because I was pretty hungover when I was reading this in bed. I fell asleep. I woke up laying on the book and it was completely creased and bent out of shape, so don't drink and read, people. So Mirror Image by Michael Coney tells the story of these colonists on a planet called Marilyn, where they are trying to establish a colony for the purpose of exploiting the planet for its natural resources. They are employed by a corporation, I can't remember the name of it, but they have established a base where they are under the protection of these enormous domes, but they are venturing out beyond these domes to try and establish other towns and settlements outside of this main settlement. And they're finding the planet to be kind of hostile. They are initially trying to establish this township on stilts on this wetland, which is flooded whenever the tide comes in, and they are trying to grow this super rice there. But whenever the tide comes in, these carnivorous, aggressive flying fish will descend on this township and attack and violently kill the colonists that are trying to build it. On their way back to the main settlement, they encounter these amorphous, shapeless blobs that are sort of moving and shifting around the environment. And while they are watching one of these blobs moving around, a giant lizard reptilian creature comes up to it, and the blob takes on the form of the reptilian, seemingly adopting a female form and allowing the male to mate with it as a defense mechanism. The humans brand these strange life forms amorphs, and when they go up to the amorphs, initially they start morphing into a human form as well and actually begin talking to them. So it transpires that these amorphs will take on the appearance of the person that you love the most, and they will also adopt all of your memories, knowledge, and skills. And so for many people, it will take on the appearance of their spouse, but for some people that are extremely egotistical, it will just replicate them because they love themselves more than anybody else. This leads the human colony to begin experimenting with these amorphs, who seem to be, for the most part, peaceful and friendly. And the key question that they start to ask is, well, the amorph will take on the appearance of the loved one of whatever person it has in front of it. What if you put one in a room with multiple people? Will it adopt the appearance of one of them or the other, or a bit of an amalgamation of both? And this leads to some really, really interesting developments and thought experiments, which continue throughout the course of the novel all the way to the end. One of the things I really loved about this book was that Michael G. Coney pays very special attention to the nature, the landscapes, the ecology of this planet Marilyn, describing a sort of fully formed ecosystem where you have these plants with these kind of upturned cup-like structures that capture the rainfall, extract nutrients from that water, and then distribute their waste products through their roots into the soil. So these cup trees, as they're referred to, operate in almost the opposite way to trees on Earth. And then the waste products that are distributed into the soil are consumed by these enormous subterranean worms referred to as elephant worms. I think that the amorphs initially reminded me of Solaris, which is a book that I find myself referring to a lot, even though I don't particularly love it. And that is probably the sign of a great piece of work. But Mirror Image does go in a completely different direction that I don't want to spoil, because I do think it is really entertaining to unravel this conundrum about whether the amorphs can integrate with human society and what the implications of this transformation process are, which ends up having quite an enormous scope, which is something I really like in a science fiction novel, where the ending sort of blows the doors open and leaves those enormous ramifications up to your imagination. It's not completely perfect. I think there's, again, some mistreatment of some of the female characters, and I'm not necessarily talking about the actions that happen to them. It's more about this sort of authorial voice coming through, where at one point Michael Coney seems to insist that women are incapable of reason. But for the most part, all of the sexist stuff comes through from the character perspectives, which I don't mind as much, because they're not all likeable people in this story. I've read one Michael G. Coney book before, which was Winter's Children. I've talked about that in a number of videos, and supposedly this is the debut novel of Michael G. Coney, and I find that to be incredibly impressive, because this is really solid, it's entertaining, it's short enough to blitz through in a couple of days like I did, and I thought that the amorphs were a genuinely unique and thought-provoking alien. So a bit of a mixed bag today. One book that I absolutely hated, another one which I actually quite liked. Thank you very much for watching, liking and subscribing, and I'll see you on the next one.